Hello YouTube, how's it going? This is the crossover and I'm back with another video. Today I'm going to be breaking down my free agency grades for all the Eastern Conference teams. Similar to how I set up my free agency grades, I'm going to be grading free agency based on a letters scale system. So the teams that I thought that got objectively much better through free agency, I gave them an A grade. Teams that I thought definitely got better, but maybe could have made another move here or two, or they have some questions in terms of just the roster construction. I gave them a B grade. Teams that I thought stayed relatively the same, didn't get much better, didn't get much worse, but are in a decent spot. I gave them a C grade. D grade is for teams that I thought could have done more and just didn't. Maybe some of them made some decent signings, but I thought they could have, done more to improve their team. Maybe missed out on some opportunities. I gave them a D grade. And then F grade is for teams that I thought got outright worse in free agency and didn't take advantage of, certain opportunities that were available to them. So without any further ado, let's get straight into the video. Starting off with the A tier, I have one team in this tier, and that is the Miami Heat. I think that they objectively had the best free agency in the Eastern Conference, and they walked away from this free agency with a haul of Kyle Lowry, Duncan Robinson, PJ Tucker, Markieff Morris, Dwayne Dedmon, Victor Oladipo, Gabe Vincent, and Max Strus. We could start off with Kyle Lowry. I mean, he's a perfect fit on this team. Even though he took a slight step backwards last year. He's still an all-star caliber point guard, one of the best point guards in the modern game today. He gets a guy who can play on and off the ball, can light it up from behind the arc, can play great perimeter defense, awesome synergy. With Jimmy Butler and Bam, could be that perimeter scorer who can get it going for them, when Butler can't and, Adebayo can't. I can't really think of a better fit, with Butler and Bam than Kyle Lowry. And he brings some veteran leadership. He's a champion. So amazing, awesome signing for Miami there. Retaining Duncan Robinson, I thought at a fair price. A lot of people have a problem with how much money they paid him, but, being one of the best shooters in the game, being able to shoot off movement, off the catch, had a slight down year last year, but he did miss some time last year, so I give him a pass for that. It's a very reasonable contract, very vital to this team. What they like to do, his two-man game with Bam Adebayo. It's a perfect signing, great contract. They had to bring him back, and they did. And then, acquiring PJ Tucker and Markieff Morris. This is a team that has needed a stretch four for a while since losing Jay Crowder in last year's free agency. And, you acquired two different types of players. And, that stretch four spot is a position by committee. But, PJ, if you need more of a switchable player on the floor, then you could play PJ Tucker at the four. You could switch multiple positions. We've seen what he did against Brooklyn and how valuable he was to Milwaukee in that series. And then if you need more of a traditional four, more of a bruiser, more of a bigger body, you could throw Markieff Morris in. So two solid options for Miami at that stretch four spot. Dwayne Dedmon being their backup big. He had his moments last year, a solid pickup, retaining him. And then Victor Oladipo taking a flyer on him. If he can stay healthy and, give even 40% of what he was in, Indiana when he was in his prime, huge win for Miami. They bolstered their roster, came back, and, they're going to definitely compete next year. I'm not sure how much of a threat they're going to pose to, Brooklyn specifically, but I definitely think they have a puncher's chance against Milwaukee now. And I think they're head and shoulders the third best team in the conference. And, they did a great job in this year's free agency. Definitely earned that A grade. Moving on to the B tier, we have the Chicago Bulls, who walked away from this year's free agency with a haul of DeMar DeRozan, Lonzo Ball, Alex Caruso, and Tony Bradley. Chicago Bulls definitely got better. Let me say that. They definitely improved from last year just by, adding the sheer talent that they did. Adding DeMar DeRozan to a core of Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic. That's three all-star caliber players, as well as adding a point guard, Lonzo Ball, who I think is a perfect fit with Zach LaVine. He can play, off ball, space the floor for LaVine in the half court, can defend the opposing team's best perimeter player on defense. However, I don't know how this team is going to mesh all that well, considering the fact that they now gave up 3 first-round picks for this team. Where are they really going with this team? And, where are the avenues for them to get better? They're probably banking on Patrick Williams, taking that next step, as a player. He's had Kawhi Leonard comparisons, if that is his ceiling, which I doubt it is. I'm not that high on Patrick Williams, but there's no avenues for this team to really improve anymore. And being locked into DeMar DeRozan at a 3-year, $85 million contract, that's a lot of money to be paying for a player who's not going to give you spacing. There's going to be no defense on this team outside Alonzo Ball. Alex Caruso off the bench is a solid signing. At that contract, it is a little bit pricey, especially given that he's an inconsistent shooter. Tony Bradley's a backup big. He's a solid backup big. Not much to talk about, but really that fit with Levine and Vucevic. And DeMar DeRozan. It's just three players that are just not good defensively. DeMar can't play off ball. Alonzo Ball is a good, not great off ball shooter. I understand that he shot a solid percentage. With a relatively high volume at 7 attempts per game last year, but still not a big fan of the DeMar DeRozan signing. I just don't understand it. And then I've heard Bulls fans saying, Patrick Williams, he's going to slide in that 4 and he needs to take that next step. A lot of people are saying, Patrick Williams needs to take that next step in order for this team to click. And it's like, well, he can't take that next step on offense because if Zach LaVine doesn't have the ball in his hands, then DeMar has the ball in his hands. DeMar needs the ball in his hands, to thrive. So I don't understand where this team is going. I see this completely blowing up for Chicago, but you can't deny the fact that they got better on paper, so that's the reason why I have them in the B tier. But I expect them to be a second round outing and a horrible team on defense. The fit on offense is questionable, but again, I have them in the B tier just because of the sheer upgrade in talent that they did acquire in this year's free agency. Moving on to the second team that I have in the B tier is my New York Knicks. I was a really big fan of what we did with Kemba Walker. Bringing him in as well as Derrick Rose, which, I'll get to Derrick Rose and another player in a second. But, that Kemba Walker signing was a great signing. I think right around $8 million for 2 years, if I'm mistaken. Great signing for a player who's been injury riddled, but if he could stay healthy, stay on the floor for us, can give us 19, anywhere from, given the fact that, you expect Randall to take another step or at least stay consistent, keep giving those 24 points per game that he does give. You're expecting RJ to take that big step in year 3. You probably expect Kemba Walker to probably average, 15, 17, 18 points per game on, good efficiency. He can get hot whenever you need, that perimeter score. Can really open up the floor for us. Not much of a defender, but, when you got Randall, you got RJ. Tibbs coaches a solid defensive game plan, great rotations. You got Mitch coming back. I'm hoping that we trade for Miles Turner, but, Mitch is a solid big interior defender. I don't expect him to be that big of a problem defensively. As well as Evan Fournier. Wasn't big on the Evan Fournier contract, but I like the signing. We need perimeter scoring, and, we got that with Kemba and Evan Fournier. Again, I expect him to come in here, probably average, somewhere from 15 to 18 points per game, be a starter for this team, space the floor for RJ and Randall. I think it's a pretty solid pickup, especially given that, on that 4-year contract, it's a team option on the 4th year. So I think that's a very solid value for Evan Fournier. Alec Burks, solid contract, bringing him back at around $10 million per year for, a wing scorer off the bench, a very valuable piece for us last year. The Derrick Rose contract, not big a fan of, paying him $15 million for 3 years, especially given that, his injury history and as well as that, Derrick Rose is really a bench player, a sixth man. So I'm not big on paying Derrick Rose $15 million per year, but, given that it's a team option on the 3rd year, can't be too mad. And then Nerlens Noel, paying him $30 million for 3 years. Not big a fan of that. I understand bringing him back. He's one of the best backup bigs in the game. I was very not with the move at first, but then, when you take a look at, Daniel Tice got paid $36 million for 4 years. So, I think Nerlens Noel is the better player, and relatively the same money. So not going to hate there. And it's a team option on the 3rd year as well. So the Knicks maintain cap flexibility, probably not next year. But, moving forward after that year, I don't think any of these contracts are not tradable, given the fact that Nerlens Noel is, again, one of the best backup bigs in the league, one of the best rim protectors in the league. Derrick Rose being a valuable 6-man, even if he does have injury concerns. I expect Kemba Walker and Rose to be a point guard by committee, given the fact that they both have injury history, they can keep each other fresh. Evan Fournier be a consistent starter for us, give us scoring next to RJ and Randall. The Knicks, they need a perimeter scoring. We went out there and got it, and we maintain cap flexibility. Brought back most of our guys. I'm pretty cool with it. Just some of the contracts on, Rose and Noel and, maybe Evan Fournier a little bit. I'm a bit sour on a little bit. And as well as I think just missing out, I would have much rather preferred to have Kyle Lowry, thrown the bank at Kyle Lowry for 3 years instead of having Kemba and the Derrick Rose. So that's the reason why I give the Knicks a B grade. Just the point guard by committee. I'm happy with it. I'm excited to watch it, but I am a bit cautious. And the contracts on guys like Nerlens Noel and Derrick Rose, I'm a bit hesitant on. So that's why I gave the Knicks. I have them in the B tier. Moving on to the next team that I have in the B tier, I have the Brooklyn Nets, who walked away with a haul of Blake Griffin, Patty Mills, Bruce Brown, and James Johnson. I thought the Nets had a solid free agency. They brought back Blake Griffin, was a very valuable piece for them last year, as a pseudo 4-5 who showed some flashes of a rim protector in the playoffs. Was spacing the floor for them, rolling to the basket. Looked like a little bit of old Blake Griffin with some of those dunks. Great signing for them. Got him at the vets minimum. He probably got more money from other teams, but he wants to contend. Great signing for the Nets. They picked up Patty Mills, another great signing. A guy who's one of the best off-ball shooters in the league. Can space the floor for more spacing for KD and Harden and Kyrie. Bruce Brown, bringing him back. One of the best defenders on this team last year. Kind of playing like a small ball 5 at times with his rebounding prowess and his defensive ability, as well as James Johnson, who's been pretty washed these past couple years, but maybe he can revitalize some of his youth in Brooklyn. So Brooklyn got a bunch of veterans. Blake Griffin. All these guys are rotation players. At the very least, the worst signing out of these guys is probably James Johnson, and even then, he was a solid defender, solid playmaker. In not that long ago. So the way Blake Griffin has kind of rejuvenated his career in Brooklyn, I could totally see the same thing happening for James Johnson. So Brooklyn definitely got better. Adding depth to their big three. They added some defensive pieces. Some Patty Mills is a great off-ball shooter. Shooting and defense is what they added, and that's exactly what they needed to do, to help fill out this roster, and they did that. Maybe I harbored on just a B because I don't think it's as good of a free. It's not like wow. It's just like they picked up solid guys, but it's not like a wow free agency like the Miami Heat had. So that's why I have them in the B tier. And then the last team that I have in the B tier is the Detroit Pistons. As I talked about in my video, I talked about just getting floor spacing for Cade Cunningham, and they walked out with Kelly Olynyk, and Saben Lee. I wasn't too big on that signing. I'm not the biggest Saben Lee fan. Trey Lyles was a guy that I mentioned that they should look at. Picked them up. Great stretch, a solid stretch big for them to have. Could be in their rotation, space the floor for Cade. Corey Joseph was a solid backup big for them, a solid guard for them. Excuse me. Who I think could definitely warrant something at the trade deadline, gives them another steady point guard to have off the bench, adding depth to that position. And then Kelly Olynyk is why I really like this Kelly Olynyk signing, given how good he played for Houston last year. If he can bring some of that over to Detroit and be even half of what he was in Houston, the valuable floor spacing big who had some playmaking capabilities for that Houston team, a very fun piece next to Cade and as well as Killian Hayes. You could slide him in at the 5 if he gets hot. Kelly Olynyk, Jeremy Grant, Sadiq Bey, Killian Hayes spacing the floor. Even if Cade isn't on the floor and you have Killian Hayes running your offense, you could slide in, somebody else, at that shooting guard position. You could slide in Isaiah Stewart at the 5 position. You could play Jeremy Grant at the small forward spot. I think he is capable of that. So, a lot of versatility with this team, and floor spacing from that big man spot. Next to a player like Cade Cunningham, and you can make an argument that they got the best floor spacing big on the market. So that's the reason why I have Detroit in the B tier. Moving on to the C tier, we have the Atlanta Hawks. First up, they walked away from free agency with a haul of John Collins, Gorgie Deng, Lou Williams, and Solomon Hill. We could start off with Solomon Hill, who I thought was, a solid signing for them. Gave them good defensive minutes in the playoffs. Solid wing. I expect him to be in the rotation this upcoming season. Lou Williams, another solid signing. They signed him today, I believe. Lou Williams was a solid player for them. Came up big, came up clutch for them. In this playoff series. Was day and night compared to Rajon Rondo at that backup guard spot. Was a great signing to retain him. Again, brings more veteran leadership to this team along with Solomon Hill. Gorgie Deng, another veteran, big man, probably not going to see the floor that much, but when he does, has the potential to space the floor. And I think all of these are solid signings. The reason why I have the Hawks in C tier is just because that John Collins contract. They retained their team, which they didn't get much better. They didn't get much worse. They stayed right where they were. They retained all their guys. They didn't add really anybody, and that's really the main reason I have them C tier. And as well as John Collins' contract, paying John Collins about 125 mil for 5 years. I think that's a bit much for John Collins. I understand, his importance to this Hawks team, his chemistry with Trae Young, what he brings to this team on the offensive side of the floor. But I just don't see where, I would I wouldn't pay John Collins that kind of money. I'd rather sign and trade him somewhere and get more assets. Just because of his defensive liabilities. I'm not a big fan of that contract, and that's really why I have the Hawks in C tier, along with the fact that they didn't really add anybody else. But it was solid free agency, not a bad free agency. They didn't get better, they didn't get worse. They just retained their guys, and that John Collins contract is a bit much, but that's just my personal opinion. Some guys might be fine with it. As a matter of fact, if you guys are Hawks fans, or if you're just passionate about John Collins or anything, just let me know what you guys feel about paying John Collins 125 mil for 5 years in the comments. But that's the reason why I have the Hawks in C tier. Moving on to the Washington Wizards, who walked away from free agency with a haul of Spencer Dinwiddie and Raul Neto. Not much of a haul, just two players. But Spencer Dinwiddie, I really like his fit on this team. Being that second perimeter option next to Bradley Beal, I expect him to have much better chemistry with Bradley Beal than Russell Westbrook did. Not much of his statistics from behind the arc, the percentages, tell a different story than the eye test. I think he's a much better shooter than the percentages tell or show you. But it's just because the difficulty of shots, and playing in Washington, where they're not much of a defensive team, which we'll get to in a second. But given all the spacing that they have, they drafted Corey Kispert. They got Rui Hachimura is steadily improving from behind the arc. Kyle Kuzma, Thomas Bryant, and Bradley Beal himself. Spencer Dinwiddie could come in here and get much easier shots than he did in his last healthy year in Brooklyn. But he's a great scorer. I expect him to start from day one. And then also they picked up Raul Neto, backup point guard for Washington for a while now. Not much to talk about there. And again, I put Washington in seats similar to the Hawks, and they retained some of their guys, but they didn't get much better. They didn't get much worse, and that's the reason why I have these teams in this seat here. Spencer Dinwiddie doesn't make them that much better. I don't think he has the high upside that Russell Westbrook would give you. I don't think when Washington was down, when they were the 12th, 13th, 11th seed in the Eastern Conference, if you swap Russell Westbrook with Spencer Dinwiddie, I don't think they still make it to that play-in tournament. But he's a much better fit with Bradley Beal, and I expect them to have much better chemistry. But again, Washington is one of the worst teams in the league defensively. They didn't address that in the draft. They didn't address that free agency. I'm going to expect them to continue to struggle on defense and be one of the better offensive teams in the league, especially given the improvement and the much better fit with this team, in Spencer Dinwiddie. So that's the reason why I have them in C tier, is just because I'm not sure how much more Spencer Dinwiddie moves the needle for this team, even though he is a better fit with this team than Russell Westbrook, and as well as they didn't address their defensive issues, so they're kind of just staying where they are as a team. Moving on to the third team that I have in the C tier, I have the Milwaukee Bucks, who walked away from this free agency with a haul of Semi Ojeleye, Rodney Hood, George Hill, and Bobby Portis. We could start with Bobby Portis first. A fan favorite from Milwaukee, just came off of a pretty solid finals run with them. Was a guy who I felt like they had to maintain, who had to retain. Given how much he means to the fan base. They just won a championship. Fan favorite, had to retain him. I thought he had some good moments as a floor spacer next to Giannis in the playoffs. Had some big games for them as well. Was a must retain for them. I have George Hill. I'm not a big George Hill fan. He kind of fell off a cliff last year for Philly, but he's had a 10-year in Milwaukee before, so maybe he can rejuvenate his career a little bit. Really big fan of this Rodney Hood signing, even though he wasn't all that great last year. He is a 6'7" wing, who's a big body, versatile, who can hit open threes for this team. And then the Semi Ojeleye signing, I'm really intrigued by this signing, because if Semi Ojeleye can hit, just become like an average three-point shooter, I'll combined with his defense, it almost seems like he's a PJ Tucker replacement for this team, which, I like these signings for Milwaukee, considering that they didn't have much cap space to work with. But, letting PJ Tucker go really did sting this team. And, again, they're expecting Semi Ojeleye to take his spot, which maybe Semi Ojeleye can make up some or make up probably most of PJ Tucker's defensive responsibilities for this Milwaukee team. But on offense, PJ Tucker's corner shooting was pretty valuable, even if he didn't do pretty much anything else outside of a couple offensive rebounds. Assembly Ojale is just not even close to that level of a shooter, but if he can reach that level of shooter, I see him being that PJ Tucker replacement. So I like some of these signings for Milwaukee. Again, not a big fan of the George Hill signing. The Rodney Hood signing I like, Bobby Porter signing I like, the Semi Ojeleye signing is intriguing, but that loss of PJ Tucker is what really stings this team. And again, they didn't get much better in this free agent. I thought they had the potential to be better given the free agents that they walked away with, but had they retained PJ Tucker, I probably would have had them in the B tier. But again, because they didn't retain PJ Tucker and, they replaced him with an intriguing player in Semi Ojeleye for this team, I don't think they got much better. I didn't think they got much worse. So that's the reason why I have them in the B tier, in the C tier, excuse me. And moving on to my final team in the C tier, I have the Orlando Magic. And they walked away from free agency with Moritz Wagner and Robin Lopez. I kind of question why they signed two bigs. I understand the Moritz Wagner signing. He was on this team last year, a big man who could give them some floor spacing capabilities. Probably not going to see the floor all that much, given the fact that they need to see what they have in Mo Bamba, whether or not they're going to decide to move forward with him or not. And as well as Wendell Carter, probably looking like he's going to be, the franchise center for this team. But the Robin Lopez signing, I understand it in terms of, bringing in a veteran presence in this locker room. But I don't understand why you would bring in Robin at that position. He's still a serviceable big, in this league as like a backup big. Especially when this team, I think they could have used some more depth, at that 3 spot, given the fact that, Franz Wagner is still a little bit raw, offensively. Isaac is coming back from an injury, and as well as Chuma, Okiki still being a young developing player. I thought they could have used some more depth at that 3 spot if you were going to add a veteran. I would have preferred a Sullivan Hill to come to the Orlando Magic. I think that would have been a much better fit for this team than Robin Lopez. But again, a team like the other 3 in this tier didn't get better, but didn't get worse. They stayed right where they are, and I appreciate that because given all the young players that they have on this team, they need to let these young players play, and that they can see what they have in these players. So again, Magic didn't get much better, didn't get better, didn't get worse, stayed right where they are as they should be. So that's all the teams that I have in the C tier. And again, all these teams didn't get much better in free agency, didn't really get better at all, but they didn't get worse at the same time. So C tier is where all these teams belong, in my opinion. Moving on to the D tier, first team I have in this tier is the Toronto Raptors. They walked away from free agency with Gary Trent Jr. and Sam Decker. We can start off with Gary Trent Jr., a player who, I think earned his contract, with 5 years and $90 million, I believe. I know it's 5 years, somewhere around that range, with the amount of money. But a very solid player, a high-level starter, one of the best, shooters in this league. I thought it's a fair contract, but that's not really the problem that I have with Toronto's free agency. Sam Decker, not a big fan. I don't understand why they brought him back into the NBA. Maybe Toronto knows something that we don't. But again, as a player who I don't expect to see the floor. And then I wasn't a big fan of what they did with Kyle Lowry. Moving him for Goran Dragic and Precious Achiuwa. Precious Achiuwa is going to be playing that forward spot, primarily the 4, and you already have OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, and Scotty Barnes, who you just spent with the 4th pick in the draft. So you acquired a young player at a position where you already have your core players at. So I'm not really sure about that. And then Goran Dragic is a veteran who is probably going to slide in at that starting point guard spot. But again, Goran Dragic is old, and I'm not sure what his trade value is. And you just gave away your franchise player, Kyle Lowry, who I'm sure you could have got much more from in a signing trade. So, the Gary Trent Jr. contract, the signing, I'm perfectly fine with that. Sam Decker, I question. And then, that Kyle Lowry signing trade, I think they could have got much better value for Kyle Lowry than what they got, especially given, again, that Precious Achiuwa plays at a position where you just spent the 4th pick in the draft on the player that plays the same position as Precious Achiuwa. And Goran Dragic is an aging veteran with injury concerns that I doubt he has much of a trade market, especially at that contract that he has. So, I'm not really sure what Toronto's doing. I expect it to be in the bottom of the Eastern Conference next year. Moving on to the second team that I have in D tier is the Charlotte Hornets, who walked away from free agency with backup point guard Ish Smith. Now, Charlotte is a team that is pretty interesting because they have a rotation set, right? So they didn't really need to come into free agency and do all that much. They did trade away Devontae Graham for a lottery protected first round pick next year from New Orleans, which is a bizarre trade for both sides. But I'm not sure why they traded away Devontae Graham. I get that it frees up more more playing time for LaMelo Ball, more playing time for Rozier, more playing time for James Bouknight, my boy James Bouknight. But again, they're trying to compete, and Devontae Graham is a point guard who can light it up for them, especially off the bench. So I kind of question that. They replace him with Ish Smith, who is a solid backup big, but Devontae Graham is the much better player. And there's a very low chance of New Orleans making the playoffs next year. So you basically gave away Devontae Graham for nothing. And then they haven't really made any other moves. I feel like this team could have added another power forward. I saw rumors earlier, actually right before I started recording, of them targeting Lowry Marketing, which would be a great signing for this team. I think they could have made another splash, which they didn't. Walking away, basically replacing Devontae Graham with Ish Smith is a negative, in my opinion, especially since you gave away Devontae Graham for pretty much nothing, because New Orleans does not look like a playoff team, at this point in time. So I think Charlotte, definitively got, a little worse, from this free agency class, pending if they do sign Larry Marketing. Moving on to the final team that I have in D tier, I have the Indiana Pacers, who walked away from free agency with TJ McConnell and Torrey Craig. Wasn't big on the Torrey Craig contract. I believe he's making about $10 million for 2 years, which is a lot for Torrey Craig. I think this team definitely needed more depth at that forward spot, but I don't understand why you would sign a forward and not just draft one. I thought Jalen Johnson coming into the draft would have been a great fit for this Pacers team. A guy who they can bank on, coming with upside. But there's not much upside on the team, and that's the problem that I have with Indiana. Even with the CJ McConnell signing, is that they're not going after any big fish. They're not making any moves. It's just a bunch of solid players, and that's the problem with Indiana. As a franchise, really, is that they're always stuck, in that middle tier. They're stuck in no man's land right now, and they didn't do anything to help their situation. They put themselves in I could see them having problems going forward. With that Torrey Craig contract. I'm not sure who's going to trade for that at the deadline when they're at the bottom of the playoff race. And TJ McConnell as well, solid backup point guard. Pesky defender. But again, Pacers are in no man's land. They've done nothing in this offseason to move themselves out of no man's land, except for, bringing in Rick Carlisle, which, I'm not sure how much that's going to help exactly. But, again, none of these teams in D tier did anything to help their situation. And if anything, missed out on some opportunities and, got a little bit worse, in my opinion, during this free agency. Moving on to my final tier, the F tier. The first team in this tier I have is the Cleveland Cavaliers. Their only move in this year's free agency has been re-signing Jarrett Allen to 5 years, $200 million, officially making Jarrett Allen the fifth highest paid center in the league. Those other four guys being Rudy Gobert, 3-time Defensive Player of the Year winner, one of the 25, 30 best players in the league. Karl-Anthony Towns, a generational offensive talent, the best big man shooter of all time, a top 20 player in this league. Joel Embiid, MVP caliber player every single year, top 10 player in this league. Nikola Jokic, the MVP. And then you got Jarrett Allen, who is a rim running, shot blocking big, and that's all Jarrett Allen does. To be paying him that much money and making no other moves, I expected Cleveland to move on from these veterans. That's what I said in their video. That was my opinion on what they should do. You're not going to compete in the Eastern Conference, especially given most of these other teams bolstered their roster with talent, and to sign Jarrett Allen to that large of a contract, you'd think Cleveland would learn by now. But obviously they haven't. They didn't try to move on from Kevin Love. They didn't try to go after any of the young guys. They didn't try to move off of, I think Larry Nance is their most positive trade asset. Didn't do anything with him. I thought they could have got something from a contending team for him. Didn't explore the trade market for Shetty Osman. Didn't do much of anything. Cleveland did nothing except re-sign Jarrett Allen to a extremely large contract for a player that does not equal that value. Jarrett Allen got paid more than Evan Fournier. And that's absurd to me. So Cleveland in the F tier, they added to their problems instead of solving it this offseason by, putting themselves in a hole where they're paying a rim rolling big $100 million for 5 years. Moving on to the second team in F tier, I have the Philadelphia 76ers. Just what is Philly doing? what are they doing? They didn't sign a point guard, sign Andre Drummond as a backup big. Like, if they keep Ben Simmons on the team, and they're gonna go with those backup big Ben Simmons lineups where he's the best, he's the presumed best player on the floor. Ben Simmons and Andre Drummond on the floor together, like, what is going on? I don't understand that signing at all. Danny Green, $10 million to $20 million for 2 years. Danny Green is not the shooter that he was, not the defender that he was. Just puzzling signing. Furkan Korkmaz, $15 million for 3 years. I like that signing, but again, that's all they did. Georges Niang, solid role player for Utah, was not a playoff level player, and that's the problem. Andre Drummond is not a playoff level player. Georges Niang is not a playoff level player. Even Furkan Korkmaz didn't see the floor that much in the playoffs. Danny Green did not see the floor all that much, even though he was hurt, but he was not performing well. So you effectively got no players to help your needs. You still haven't traded Ben Simmons. Philly might as well just blow the whole thing up at this point. I mean, I think this is a sign that they've given up. I mean, completely got worse. There's no need to even talk about Philly. And then the last team that I have in the F tier is another team that I have no idea what they're doing, and that is the Boston Celtics. They added Josh Richardson, let Evan Fournier go. They signed and traded Gordon Hayward away for that trade exception. They brought in Evan Fournier with that traded exception, let him walk to us. They traded for Josh Richardson, Moses Brown, Al Horford. You think that they have enough centers already when they don't have a starting. Their point guard right now is either Marcus Smart or Peyton Pritchard, and instead they opt to bring in Enes Kanter, who, when they already have Moses Brown, they already have Al Horford. They got all the wings in the world. No point guard. I don't understand. I don't see, especially in a market where they have. Boston does have their picks moving forward. I don't understand why they didn't try to make a sign and trade for, one of these guards. Maybe they could pick up a player like Reggie Jackson or Dennis Schroeder. Those are two large, significant players that are still on the market. Maybe not significant, but, they're names that are still out there on the market. If they could pick up one of those, maybe they move up a tier or two. But just they have no point guard, and they signed a big when they already have three bigs. I just don't understand what Philly is doing. What Boston's doing, or Philly, or Cleveland. These three teams, I feel bad for their fans. Philly might as well just give up, trade Ben Simmons, trade Joel Embiid, just start it all over. Boston, they don't have a point guard. I don't know what they're doing. And then Cleveland, signing a rim rolling big to $100 million for 5 years. Just, I don't understand what either of these three teams, are really doing, and they all belong in the F tier. And that's the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Pretty soon, I'm going to be releasing my grades for the Western Conference teams in terms of, how well they did in free agency pretty soon. So stay on the lookout for that. But besides that, that's the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please have a blessed day and take care of yourselves. Peace.